everybody. I'm Beatty and welcome again, my friends, to the Ask Beatty Show. And it is really amazing how many things can actually be worked out if we have a we can work it out mindset rather than a I'm right, you're wrong, you're a loser, I'm a winner. And if we could only somehow teach our children at a very, very young age. And of course, I'm not talking about competitive sports where, of course, we want to win, but the idea of bringing people together, the idea of being able to resolve differences is just so critical. It's so critical in our personal lives, in our professional lives. In fact, one of the things that people ask me all the time as a psychotherapist and a sex therapist and an author and a speaker, they asked me, so what do you think, Beatty, are really the most important ingredients that actually make or break relationships? And in the early years, I used to pause and I'd say, well, my answers are not lovey-dovey, they're not romantic, they're not sexy, but make no mistake that the two most important areas and ingredients that really do make or break relationships happen to be, as unsexy as these concepts are, emotional communication and problem solving. Because in every relationship, there are going to be issues, and people need to have the skill, and it really is a skill of being able to sit down, of being able to have conversations, of being able to be willing to make compromises. Of course, there are certain compromises that you absolutely do not want to make, but I think in most situations, we can make compromises and we can look toward coming to a win-win resolution. And just think, if we could actually embrace that kind of a concept around the world, we would see such differences in the way societies really were able to function. So for those of you who are tuning in for the very first time and you're wondering, okay, what is she really talking about and who is Beatty Cohn-Brennan? I am a nationally recognized psychotherapist and sex therapist. And, for the last number of years, I talk about having practiced and I continue to practice. I have a private practice here in very steamy, very humid, hot New York City, and also in East Hampton. And I've been practicing now for over 35 years. And the people who I treat contact me with issues ranging from depression and anxiety and other psychiatric problems and substance abuse of various different kinds, sexual assault, and early child sexual abuse. And what I'm seeing more and more is that people are contacting me out of sheer loneliness. They are lacking and they are wanting real connections over and above the so-called connections that people may have, online and on their various different, devices. And, another area where I have gotten calls more often, I think, in the last few years than ever before, is in the area of estrangement. And it's not the adult children that are contacting me, it is the parents. And you may actually be surprised to know, and this statistic, it is a very depressing statistic, is that about a third of adult children are estranged from their parents, from their family of origins. And I was reading in the New York Times, I guess it was about a year ago, where a therapist, and I wouldn't even mention his name, is somebody who really is promoting cutoffs. And there are ways as a psychotherapist to bring people together. And there are also ways to really keep people and keep families apart. And I want to give you an example, because this Thursday, if you happen to be in East Hampton, I'm giving my yearly annual talk at the East Hampton Library, and the topic happens to be buyer beware. is your therapist helpful or harmful? And I want to give you an example of a recent case study that I am currently involved in. A woman, let's call her Barbara, is 70 years old and she has three adult children. She is estranged, really completely estranged from two of the three. They are married, they have grandchildren, they don't want to have anything to do with her. They do not want her to see the grandchildren under any circumstances at all. And in getting to know Barbara, it was really important for me to find out what was this all about. Now, Barbara has had a very erratic life, no doubt. Her first husband died. She had multiple men coming in and out of her life. There was not a lot of real stability for her sons. She moved a number of times, and but on top of all of that, there was an enormous amount of love. Yes, Barbara clearly had her issues. And I would say that as a single mother and somebody who had had some unfortunate relationships and subsequent unfortunate marriages, no, there wasn't the kind of ideal stability that her children, ideally could have had. But nonetheless, Barbara's heart is broken. So it was a question of really how to proceed. I could have said, look, okay, Barbara, two of your three sons, they don't want to have anything to do with you. You need to kind of suck it up. Of course, I wouldn't put it that way. And accept the reality that there were consequences to the way you raised the boys, despite your good intentions. And we could have left it at that. And I could have said, be happy that your eldest son does want to have a relationship with you, even though his wife does not. And as a result, she was not allowed to see the grandchildren. So, as I said, one therapist could have left it exactly like that. But this is not the way I work. I work in a very systemic way. I wanted to understand her son's perspective and see whether or not there may be a path toward reconciliation, win-win resolution. So what did I do? I asked Barbara whether or not it would be okay for me to contact the two sons who absolutely wanted nothing to do with her. So she suggested that the eldest son speak to his brothers and kind of pave the way. And I thought that was going to be a great idea. And so what happened is that I had two separate conversations, actually three separate conversations with the estranged sons. And it was really interesting. They were very upset with their mother, despite the fact that they said that they still really loved her. They talked about the instability in their lives. They talked about the men that came and went. They talked about the moves that they were actually made to leave their schools and their friends. And they were furious, absolutely furious on the phone. But it was really important that I, as their mom's therapist, gave them an opportunity to be able to express their feelings. But then there was the icing on the cake. And what was that about? Well, apparently, and this is something that I just learned in treating Barbara, is that she has had a history of shoplifting. Now, she has enough money that she does not need to go into any store and steal anything. But apparently she's 70 now. So at 50, there seemed to be more dislocation in her life. She began to shoplift and apparently was arrested a number of times. But the impact of those arrests seemed to be very short-lived. So recently, very recently, within the last probably 6 weeks, she went into a store, and of all things, she stole a pillowcase. Now, she could well afford to buy pillowcases and sheets and probably almost anything else that she would want to buy. So she stole this pillowcase and she was caught, and she was arrested, and the story was on television, and it was in the local newspaper. And this for her sons, for her estranged sons, that was it. That was it. Now, why she was stealing when she didn't need to steal, when she had plenty of money to buy things. I mean, these were things that we would start to look at in our therapy together. But the good news, if you may be wondering, good news, but yes, the good news is that Barbara is absolutely committed. She is committed to working through her issues, her historical issues, even though we can't change our history, and really looking at herself and her behavior and her life now. She's got a really terrific man in her life, I think probably for the first time, and see whether or not her patterns of behavior, the dynamics in her life, the self-destructive dynamics that really took her off on a lot of detours, whether or not somehow these could be put now into a better place, even though we can't change anything that happened even 1 second ago. So in talking with her sons, when I talk about good news, this is what they said at the end of the conversation. They said, look, right now, we don't want to have anything to do with our mom, but you sound like you know what you're doing. So how about this? This is what they said to me. They said, we'd like you to hopefully continue to work with mom, even though the boys felt that she would not be consistent with me, but she has been very persistent and very consistent with her sessions. And they said that if I felt in a few months from now that she was really open to hearing what they had to say and the rest of the story from their perspective, they would be willing to meet. Now, that was the best news that I could have heard, and really the best news that Barbara could have heard. So why am I telling you the story? I'm telling you the story because therapist number one would have left it and would have been working with Barbara to help her deal with the consequences, and she's still going to have to deal with the consequences in any case, of a lot of her poor decision making and her irresponsible behavior. No question about that. But in looking at families and in looking at systems in the way I do, in the way I was trained, and I'm very grateful to my training at McGill University. I have a master's degree in clinical social work and postgraduate specialization in marriage and family therapy and sexual dysfunction. So there's been a lot of really, really good training. So depending on, I mean, this is such an interesting example that depending on the therapist's orientation, it could go one way and it could go another way, which is why my talk at the East Hampton Library this Thursday night. And by the way, if you are in the Hamptons, please come to the library. The admission is free, and we would have a lot of opportunity to talk about the things that you really do need to look for if you are thinking about getting into therapy, because more and more people, and I think it's a really, really good thing, are reaching out for a variety of different issues, but on the other hand, I mean, there have never been more coaches and love coaches, life coaches, wellness coaches, therapists of various different kinds. Many, I must say, who do not have the credentials. Now, the other thing I want to tell you is that I am not for everybody as a therapist at all. If somebody is just wanting to come and they're just wanting to talk about their problems, and if they're just wanting to complain, and if they're not interested in interaction, if they're not interested in feedback, if they're not interested in suggestions, and if they're not interested in doing some homework, I am absolutely the wrong person for that, for that person. But again, we have to be, whether we're talking about romantic relationships or professional relationships, we have to be so, so, so careful who we let into our lives. And I have seen an enormous amount of damage that occurs when people are seeing therapists who do not know what they are doing. And I want to give you another example. This is an example, a couple that had reached out to me. Actually, it was through Dan's Papers. I'm the advice columnist for Dan's Papers in the Hamptons in New York City and Palm Beach. And I've been writing two Ask Beatty columns a month for the last, it's a little over 3 years. So this couple contacted me, and the presenting problem was that the husband was really not interested in sex, and they were in their 50s, supposedly loved each other, they had children, and the question, of course, that needed to be explored was really what was going on. Why were they living in a sexless marriage? And the woman was really upset, and understandably so, and she was concerned. Was there another woman? He didn't find her attractive. What was happening? So when I see couples for the first time, I meet with the couple, of course, as long as everybody feels safe, together, and I do an initial evaluation beginning from the beginning when they were dating and they fell in love, and then we were able to take a look at some of the issues, what went wrong, when and how and why did they get off a really good constructive path. So that was what I did with this particular couple, as I do with everyone. But step number 2, and again, there are many therapists who wouldn't do this. I suspect that there are probably some therapists who do. But I see the people individually because I really need to find out the complete story. I want to rule out affairs. I want to rule out any serious psychiatric issues. And I need to know the individual. So I usually spend in an initial couples evaluation, ideally a couple of hours, not 45 minutes, not 50 minutes. I learned from my mom, who was a teacher in Canada, 60 minutes is an hour. So my sessions are 60-minute sessions. So I met with the woman, and she was just she was really, really upset about what's going on. And I love him, and I don't want to live in a sexless marriage. And maybe there's something that you, as a sex therapist, I'm also a sex therapist, can figure out what is going on. So that was my meeting with the wife. With the husband, we sat down, and the first thing he said to me was this. He said, "Beatty, I need to know 1,000% that whatever it is that we talk about in this room will never, 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 be relayed to anyone, obviously to my wife." And I said, "Of course." So he proceeded to tell me that he was gay. And yes, he had married, and yes, they had a couple of children, but that he was gay, and that he actually had a partner who he saw on occasion. It was not a regular thing at all. And that he absolutely, under no circumstances, ever wanted this to come out. Not to the community, not to his children, and not to his wife. So, of course, the real question then became, what to do, because as a sex therapist, I look at people's, mental health, whether there's depression, anxiety, whether there's a history of early child sexual abuse. I look at the relationship. I have people, get their testosterone levels done and their estrogen levels checked. And we look at the medications that people might be taking and the sexual side effects of various different medications and the physical state that these people are in medically. And the list goes really, on and on. And then, of course, people have issues with their body. There are exercises that I always recommend. But in this case, just think about this. All of this would have been an absolute waste of time and energy and money on the part of all of us if I had not met with this man individually and really found out the real scoop, what was really going on. So what happened? So we reconvened, the three of us reconvened, and he told her that he loved her. He told her that he absolutely did not want a divorce. He also told her that he thought that she was very attractive, but that at this stage in his life, he was not interested in sex. So the ball was really in her court. She then was in a position where she needed to make a decision what she was going to do. And I met with her a few times and she said, look, I'm 50 years old and I do love my husband and I don't want to get a divorce and I don't want to break up the family. However, I'm not willing to live in a sexless marriage. We talked about an open marriage, and this was something that neither of them really agreed to. So her option, she was left with one option. And the option was to divorce. But the reason why I'm relaying this story is that it is so important. If you decide that you are going to look for a therapist and get yourself into therapy, that you really have very, very clear ideas. And how can the consumer know all of this, which is why you have to come to my talk at the East Hampton Library this Thursday at 6 o'clock and hear all of the different questions and all of the different things. And let me just say one thing, is that the best possible scenario is that you get a referral from someone that you trust, ideally your family doctor. Remember that your best friend's therapist may not at all be the therapist for you. And I know that there's many different ways of doing therapy, but if you're going to get to the root of the problem, even though we cannot change our history, there are things to do so you can see with these two examples how things could have went, how things really, really could have went had I not met with the people individually so that I was really able to get the full story. So therapy and therapy training, it's complex. It's complex. And I think it's a wonderful thing that people are reaching out and asking for help. And I say this all the time, there's so many ups and downs in our lives. And I think it's great that people more and more are giving themselves permission to reach out and ask for help, because I mean life is crazy. We're running around in a million different directions. There's work, there's children, there's a relationship. If you're lucky enough to have a really good relationship, you want to take care of your mental health, you want to take care of your physical health. And the reality is that there's only 24 hours in the day, and it's hard. It's really hard for the majority of people to really, really stay on track. But before the show today, and I'm not sure how I found this article, I discovered that Iceland, and I like to look at best practices that work around the world, because we're not doing so well in the health and wellness category in the United States. So this is what I found, that Iceland has implemented a successful 4-day work week with trials starting. The trials actually started in 2015 and widespread adoption by 2019. So what happened? The shift involved reducing the standard work week from 40 hours to 35 or 36 hours with no loss of pay. And what had happened was it resulted, and this is so interesting. So it's not just the amount of time that we work, but it's the quality that we give to our jobs. So it actually resulted in increased worker well-being and productivity. And that the experiment has been considered an overwhelming success and has led to broader discussions about shorter work weeks worldwide. And this is actually the first time that I have heard about this, where you have no pay cut, reduced hours, increased well-being, productivity gains. I mean, talk about a win-win resolution. And just think what the global impact would actually be if we had shorter work weeks and we were able to spend our time doing more things with our families, more things with ourselves, exercising, interacting. So I'm going to actually be following this now and see what other countries around the world, whether or not they are going to try to replicate and duplicate what is actually going on in Iceland. Well, for all of you who've been listening to the Ask Beatty show now, we're in year number 13. You know that every single week we have a How Are You Doing segment. And I know that people maybe once a year, twice a year, they look at their life and they make resolutions and then we decide that we're going to make some changes. But what I like to do, and I do this with myself, is I like to check in every single week and see how we're doing in a variety of different categories, of course, beginning with mental health. Looking at if you happen to be somebody who is suffering from depression or anxiety, or substance abuse of various different kinds, or if you have a lot of, in quotes, unfinished business from your family of origin, whether or not we're talking about abuse, whether we're talking about sexual assault, sexual abuse, whether these are the things that are continuing to play havoc with your life. So my question is, how are you managing? Are you in therapy? Are things that you might be doing, exercising, talking to friends, eating well, sleeping well, are these things helping you to feel less depressed, less anxious? And if they're not, there needs to be a plan of action. And of course, the best plan of action, is to find a qualified therapist who will be able to help you, once and for all, deal with the issues that are really interfering and robbing you of a good quality of life. I mentioned substance abuse, and there was just, a lot written most recently about concerns about marijuana and vaping. And, people have said for years, oh, well, there are no issues. And I don't have the studies in front of me, but I have been reading in the paper that there are concerns. So let's just not give ourselves a pass if we're saying, oh well, we're only smoking or we're only vaping. I really suggest, and with artificial intelligence right now, that you Google and take a look. And I promise you, in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to look at the results of some of the studies that have been really tracking the consequences of people who are using marijuana and who are vaping. And what about your physical health? Sometimes, we just kind of take it for granted, and that we are not doing, what is in our best interests. I know it's been so hot here in New York City, and I haven't been sleeping well. And for me, I'm the kind of person, I need like about 8 to 10 hours of good, solid sound sleep every single night. So I've been waking up and feeling irritable, And for me, when I feel irritable, I get on the treadmill, I talk to my husband, I have a nice cup of coffee, and I really try to chill. But sleep for me is something that's really, really important. So again, just looking at your sleep and making sure that you are eating well, that you are surrounding yourself with positive people. How important is that? I mean, I have a philosophy of life where I want zero poison in my life, not poisonous food or poisonous people. And I'm sure many of you have heard me say that a little bit of poison is still poison. So I think it's important that we look at ourselves and make not fool ourselves about how we're living and what we're doing and what we're not doing, and whether or not we actually have a purpose. And I have found too that being able to give to the thousands of people that I have treated over the years, it has really given me a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, a sensitivity that I probably would never have had if I had not been really fortunate enough to be in a profession where I have treated people from every single walk of life. So I think it's about really being honest with ourselves and making sure as best as we can, and nothing is perfect, that we are really on track. And if we're finding whether it is with our relationships and that we are coasting and we are not communicating and we are not dealing and we are disconnected, or whether it is our mental health issues, or whether or not it is our self-care or lack of self-care, again, the real question becomes, what are we going to do about it? Because it is our avoidance, it is our denial, it is our self-blame, it is our beating ourselves up that really keeps us in a downward spiral. And that's why I do the segment every single week, and people probably think enough already, but I think it is really important that we keep track of all of these kinds of things, because these are the things that really impact our life. And again, I like to look at, what are countries around the world? What does the research tell us about the best practices that keep us healthy physically and emotionally and psychologically? So eating a Mediterranean diet, making regular time for exercise. I mean, the studies are so clear about exercise, weight training. I mean, really important. Socializing regularly and consistently. And I'm not talking about socializing just on the computer. I'm talking about face-to-face socialization. There is nothing better. Taking short naps if you're able to, turning off your electronic devices. Again, spending more time with supportive people, eliminating toxins in your diet and toxins in your relationship. Trying positive visualization. If you're having a really bad time or a bad day, can you bring up something beautiful, whether it's flowers or the water or nature or something positive that you would then be able to actually visualize? Expressing your feelings, not denying or avoiding. And if you don't have anybody to express your feelings to, keeping a journal is actually a really, really good way to get things out. Getting a dog or a pet makes all the difference in the world. We live in an area in New York City, it seems as if every single person has a dog. And not only, the animals, they give us so much, but the actual socialization that occurs with all of us, when we're walking our pets, it's important, and it's nice and it's fun, and there is some connection. Of course, eliminating sugar and soda and alcohol. Again, recent studies that even a drink is not something that is good for our health. Again, finding a meaningful purpose and figuring out what is it that really motivates you to get up every single morning and remaining sexually active. Whether or not you have a partner or not, it still can be fun. And committing ways every single day to find a balance between work and play. And again, I mentioned the exercise because the studies, I mean, we've been reading about these studies, for years. And a recent study, in fact, I had cited this a couple of weeks ago. There were over 1,000 studies that indicate that exercise can be more effective than counseling or medication for depression. Now, again, depending on your level of depression. If you're severely depressed, you're going to need more than exercise. But as I say, the studies have been very, very clear in letting people know the importance, the importance, the importance. And, for example, in this one study, they reviewed 97 review papers, which involved over 1,000 trials and almost 130,000 participants. And what they found was that doing 150 minutes each week of various types of physical activities, such as walking, lifting weights, and yoga, significantly reduced depression, anxiety, and psychological distress compared to usual care, such as medications. Now, again, that's not making broad generalizations. There are people who are going to need medication. There are people who are going to need counseling. There are people who are going to benefit from counseling and medication. But I think that we really, really need to take the importance of exercise really seriously, okay? And the findings in all these studies, they underscore the crucial role of exercise for managing depression, anxiety, and psychological distress. So it is 20 to 4 here in New York City. So if you have not yet exercised, hopefully you're going to give yourself permission as soon as the show is over to maybe take a walk or maybe, maybe do something, maybe lift some weights or something that will get your heart rate going. And in getting your heart rate going, it is also going to improve your serotonin levels, which happen to affect our mood. I found in I think in one of the journals, and this was just a little piece. It says, marry the person who does these 8 things. Now, when I read marry the person, I'm going to read you these things, and you're going to see it's not just about marrying the person. These are the qualities that we want in all of our healthy relationships. Number 1, apologize and then corrects their behavior. Whether it's a friend, whether it's a colleague, whether it's a lover, whether it's a spouse, we want people to not just apologize and then continue to do the same thing that hurts us. So apologize and then you correct your behavior. Number 2, prioritize you and your relationships. This is what I have been saying for so many years. That probably the number 1 reason, why couples are having so much difficulty, other than the fact that they may not have chosen wisely in the beginning, is that we don't prioritize our relationships. We have the children, we have work, we have a lot of external pressures. And I've always believed and I've always tried to do in my own life to keep the couple at the top of the list of priorities. It is really, really important. So if you haven't connected, if you have a a lover or a spouse or a partner and you haven't connected, maybe you can, after the show, send a text, make a phone call. Just say, I was thinking about you. I love you. I miss you. I can't wait to see you. It's these kinds of things that make all the difference in the world. Number three, we want to be with someone who gets excited about our goals and our ambitions, somebody who we can share the good times and the bad times with, a supporter. You want a fan. You want your partner to be your fan and really applaud your successes. You want someone who's curious about you and always wants to know more. And this is where the emotional communication, the emotional intimacy, the caring, the sharing, the respect, the consideration. I mean, the reality is that we can have physical intimacy and have no emotional intimacy, or we can have a lot of emotional intimacy where there is no physical intimacy or physical or sexual connection. And if we're looking at partnerships, love partnerships, obviously we would like it all. We would like both. Is empathic, somebody who gets you. So when you're having a bad day, to say something like, I'm so sorry, rather than, oh, well, you know what, all you have to do is just change your mind or change your mindset. You want to be with somebody who is empathic, who has the kind of sensitivity that will be supportive of you through good times and through bad times. Somebody who remembers things that matter to you. Maybe it's a cookie. Maybe it's a scone. Maybe it's a special kind of card. It's these little things. We're not talking about money here. We're not talking about mansions on the water. We're talking about little things that really do make the difference. Somebody who you enjoy spending time with, where it's nice, where you're comfortable, where it's fun. Of course, it can't always be fun, but where you just feel, you feel a connection. And that's so important. And of course, somebody who stimulates you intellectually and emotionally. And as I say, even though this little piece was marry the person who does, I think that the people who we have in our life, our friends, especially good friends, I would hope that they also, have many of these kinds of characteristics. Well, about 6 weeks ago, I received an email from one of the Progressive Radio Network listeners, and they wanted to know about my journey as a therapist. And I thought, really, I don't say too much about myself. I say I'm a therapist and I'm happily married to Jim, who's a sociologist and a criminologist and an activist, and I'm a sex therapist and an author, but I've never really talked about my journey. But I'm now going to spend the next few minutes telling you a little bit about me. And it's for over 35 years, I have treated thousands of men and women and children of all ages and stages in life, and from every socioeconomic background and gender and social, sexual orientation and religion. And of course, they come to me with depression and anxiety and relationship issues and loneliness and, estrangement, and always call when there is a crisis. And I've always felt, I wish that there was a way that I could somehow fast forward people, emailing or picking up the phone so that they wouldn't have to suffer for years and years. And I think it's just so important also that the schools do a lot more. We're talking about primary identification of problems and primary interventions. So I grew up in a family, in an Orthodox Jewish family in Winnipeg, Canada. I'm an only child. And my parents, they were not wealthy, but giving and supporting different charities, all of this was very important. And that was a role model for me, just in watching my parents and how they were able to really give of themselves. And when I was about 10 years old, they bought me a white transistor radio for Hanukkah. And I don't know how I found this show, but there was a show at midnight called Ask the Pastor, and it was a call-in counseling radio talk show. And here I am, I'm 10 years old, it is midnight, and I would never, ever, ever miss this show at midnight where people would be calling in about their problems. And I really dreamed of having a show like this. And it was interesting, the little kids, that I grew up with, they would ask me questions about boys and about dating. And of course, I hosted many call-in counseling radio talk shows on major networks here in the United States. And I feel so lucky that when I was a lot older, I actually met the pastor. I met the minister who hosted the show, and I thanked him so much because that was one of the things that I really wanted to do. And then, of course, I went to McGill University and did my master's degree in clinical social work and have postgraduate specialization in marriage and family therapy and sexual dysfunction. And I worked in the Montreal inner city schools as a school social worker. And then I became one of the directors of the entire Greater Montreal School Social Services program, where there were hundreds of schools. And what was so great is that we had programs where there was literally no child was left behind at all. Teachers and guidance counselors, everybody knew if there were problems, there were referrals made. We worked as a team. And I'm sure that we saved, thousands and thousands and thousands of children's lives who were not left behind. And I remember going and making home visits and visiting all kinds of parents and people who I normally would never have met in my own personal life. And, after that, I moved and I became an executive director of a Jewish family service agency in Calgary, Canada. But what I really felt, I really missed the one-on-one that I had in treating people. In fact, I was thinking about this man recently, one of my favorite patients who I actually treated when I moved to the United States in Providence, Rhode Island, was somebody who had been, he'd been charged with second-degree murder. And I worked with him before he went to prison. And he had no support from anyone. He had grown up in a very poverty-stricken environment. And it was a wonderful experience working with, let's call him Paul. And he served his time. We kept in touch. And just before his release, I remember receiving a really beautiful card from him thanking me, for the work that we had done together. And so that's been, part of my journey is, meeting people, working with people who in my normal personal life that I never would have had the opportunity, to meet. And then, of course, you've heard about my book. I did research with 450 people and came up with my, infamous 10-step formula that teaches people how to assess who's right for you and who's wrong for you before committing to any serious relationship. And this culminated in my first book, For Better, For Worse, Forever, Discover the Path to Lasting Love. And it was interesting. I started to do a lot of radio and a lot of television. And when I was living in Florida, I received this personal call from Governor Bush and Jeb Bush. And he asked me to serve on the commission. It was the Marriage and Family Initiative for the state of Florida. So I was Commissioner Beatty for a couple of years. And he appointed me ostensibly so that I would be able to implement my relationship education program in the schools and in the colleges. And it was a very interesting experience for me. I had never been involved politically in anything. And I met with all the major decision makers in the state of Florida who could really have made this happen, who would have been able to really implement the programs and give, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of students an opportunity to really learn, the ABCs of healthy relationships. But what I discovered, unfortunately, was that nobody really cared at all. So that was the news that came, as a result of being a commissioner. And I guess in the political world, we find out a lot of things about people who we hope or we think really care about making a difference. But I would say, as a psychotherapist, I've learned the most from my patients. And I admire all the people who've actually trusted me, entrusted me with my advice and guidance and helping them to lead happier lives and to have healthier and happier relationships. And my joy has really come from helping them discover what is really important. And I'm grateful for the clarity that I have gained, from doing this kind of work. And I don't look at it actually as work. And the things that are so clear and that we all really, really need to take in is that it's not the bigger house, the fancier car, the designer clothes, and the multi-million-dollar stock portfolio that brings happiness. And I have treated many of these people who have this kind of wealth. And yes, we need a certain standard of living, and there should be a guaranteed annual income, and people should not have to struggle in the way that they are struggling. But it is really about love and finding a meaningful purpose to get out of bed every single day and giving back to others in the spirit of generosity and love and awe and wonder. And for me, what I have learned that is really what a life well lived is all about. And for me, starting off, in Winnipeg, Canada, so many years ago, I never could have imagined, what my life, and certainly ups and downs like everybody else, what my life and what my career, would have really, ended up. But for me, I love treating people as much today is when I started, many, many years ago. I have learned so much. I've learned so much from people who I would never, ever, ever have had the opportunity, to meet in my normal, everyday life. I remember living in Providence, Rhode Island, and one of my first patients was a man who was going through the process of becoming a woman, and that was in the early 90s. It was not as common, I mean, as we hear about today. And I remember going through the process of the hormones and the changes. And what was really unfortunate about this particular situation is that his family completely, or her family, completely disowned her when she announced that she had felt for most of her life that she was living in the body of the wrong sex. And I remember I saw her every single week for, for months and months and months. And I was probably one of the only people, in her life at that point that was supporting her and saying that it was okay and that you weren't a freak and that you need to be who you are. And I think that's the whole thing, is that we have to accept people and respect people's differences, without our own beliefs and without our own judgments of what's right and what's wrong. I mean, we can decide for ourselves what's right and what's wrong. And the human condition is complex, and people who are going through, the whole transformation from female to male and male to female. This is not going to a birthday party. These are huge struggles that people are having to deal with and confront. And I think that we all need to find it in our hearts to find the sensitivity, the compassion, the understanding perhaps for things that we may not fully understand and not be able to fully accept. And I think that this is what the, ideal human condition is really all about. Well, I'm looking here at the time in hot and humid New York City. It is 3:58. Don't know where the time is gone, but I want to leave you with my 2 weekly messages. The first, of course, is that we need to do everything that we could possibly do to be living our life well, to be living our life in ways that are in our best interest. So are you living your life in ways that are in your best interest in all the different categories that I have mentioned today? And of course, secondly, and I think it's obvious, or I hope it's obvious to all of us, that we need to find much better ways to embrace and accept and try to understand and try to find some compassion and sensitivity for things in our life that may not quite make sense. And to put away our judgments and to put away our discriminatory behavior. And in this way, we would be able to contribute to a much more loving society without the wars and without the struggles. And we can only do what we can do, but we can each do, I believe, a lot better in our own lives in dealing with the people that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. And maybe the next time, you bump into somebody, instead of swearing at them, maybe you could smile and say, I'm sorry. And in this way, we would all find much better ways to connect. So, okay, everybody, I hope you're going to have a really good rest of the day. And I will see you next week, next Monday, and every Monday from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on the Ask Beatty Show on the Progressive Radio Network. So stay cool, be well, be good to yourself, and let's be good to others. Bye-bye, everybody.